And South Carolina beat Virginia yesterday up in Charlottesville. A result that was very surprising, but not totally unforeseen, as we welcome in Collyn Taylor from Gamecock Central, my podcasting partner over on the Gamecock Central Podcast Network. And Collyn, you and I kind of expressed a similar sentiment. Not the most ridiculous thing ever if Carolina were to pull off the upset. There is a formula. Stylistically, it seemed like Carolina was always going to have a chance. But we should have gone in a little harder on calling this upset because we were right on the precipice there.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit right at the end of the podcast about making score predictions, and I think I would have predicted a South Carolina win if we had done that. Now, granted, that's hindsight. Probably puffed my chest a little bit. But yeah, I think it was definitely within the realm of possibility if things broke right for South Carolina going into Sunday's game, and everything broke right for South Carolina in Sunday's game, and they played probably their best all-around game of the year yesterday up in Charlottesville.
The number one thing that we identified as a potential advantage for South Carolina is if they could control the pace of the game, which they absolutely did. And a huge part of that was being able to force turnovers and force live ball turnovers. 14 steals led to a lot of transition opportunities for South Carolina. And just the activity on the defense, which was much maligned for the first part of the season, this doesn't look like the same defensive team that we saw 2 weeks ago.
No, and they're doing a few different things defensively. They're trapping a little bit more on the baseline than I'm used to them seeing, and they're pressuring the ball a little bit further up half court than they were at the beginning of the year, and that's just guys getting a little bit more comfortable in the system. So you're seeing kind of what this defense is going to look like in SEC play, which is high pressure, high turnovers, and trying to get out and run, because they have the team that if you force a turnover at midcourt, they're going to be able to get out and get a run out on you because they're so fast and so athletic.
How much of the defensive progression in the last couple of weeks has to do with young guys just getting more comfortable with Frank Martin's system, and how much of it has to do with Keyshawn Bryant being back in the starting lineup?
Oh, I mean, Keyshawn Bryant, it's night and day with him in there. You're obviously seeing some development with a guy like Trey Hannibal, who I'm really high on. But when you have the length and athleticism to insert back into the lineup like Keyshawn Bryant, it speaks volumes for what you're able to do defensively, because I don't think he gets the credit he deserves as a rebounder. Obviously, the dunks are his thing, but he's so long, he's so athletic, and he can help turn bad plays into good plays just because he can help so quickly if another guy makes a mistake.
And it's amazing. He had a dunk yesterday. It was one of those plays where I keep being surprised whenever he dunks from places on the floor that I don't expect him to have enough space or time to dunk. I've been watching this guy for a year and a half now, and I still can't get over how explosive he is.
Yeah, and I think he's sneaky explosive. You look at him and you're like, all right, that dude can definitely play basketball, but you don't expect him to take off from the free throw line and throw it down athletic. But he is, and give South Carolina credit. They design plays for it, and he goes out there and he does it. And I think that he's made a bigger impact than maybe his stats have necessarily shown over the last 3-4 games.
It was a nice even distribution. Obviously, Jair Bolden led the way with 22 points, but it was at the end of the game, and I looked at my roommate, and I was like, who's the player of the game? I mean, Jair Bolden obviously had his best game of the season, was huge. He scored, 17 or 18 in the first half, but it was so well-rounded. It was Justin Minaya making plays down the stretch, and A.J. Lawson had a nice stretch there in the middle of the second half. And you mentioned Mike Kotsar, who might be Carolina's most important player through 12 games of the season, was like very solid defensively. And you saw what happened when he went out with foul trouble around the midway point or around the 15-minute mark of the second half. Who was your player of the game?
It's got to be Mike Kotsar. I mean, you obviously look at the 22 overall from Jair, and that's phenomenal. But when Mike Kotsar wasn't in the game, Virginia went on, a 16-6 run to tie the game back up, and they threw Mike Kotsar back in and outscored Virginia by 11, down I think the final 11 minutes, 10 minutes of the game after it was 45-45. So he's the player of the game just because he is so good defensively, and he's the player of the season so far. And if you had come to me at the beginning of the year and said Mike Kotsar was the best player on this team, I probably would have told you South Carolina's not very good just because of what he was last year. But give Mike credit. He's done a lot to improve his game. He's done a lot to improve his mental side of things, and it's paying off. And he's playing it, not first team All-SEC, but, you can make an argument that Mike Kotsar is an All-SEC type player right now.
It's activity, I think, that comes to mind most when you think about what Kotsar has brought to the team this year. You look at his box score, it's 4 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals is nice. He added a block. just a couple of turnovers, and did get into a little bit of foul trouble there. Only took 4 field goal attempts, but he's kind of the fulcrum of everything that this team does. And there are still moments, there were a couple times yesterday where he lost out on a rebound, I think one on each side of the court. And you're like, that's the stuff that kind of frustrates you, because you feel like you got to rely on your 5 to win some of those big kind of rebounds in traffic. But fortunately, Carolina was able to get some key rebounds from other positions. I think that's one of the benefits of having such a long lineup, is when you can get elite rebounding from the 3 spot when you have Keyshawn Bryant there. Like, that helps you out a lot. Or, Lawson, when he's ostensibly running the point, is very helpful. But CoStar's activity on defense, getting the steal early and the assist, I think he dished it to Lawson for one of those first buckets of the game. I mean, his defensive versatility, it's hard to sum up. I don't know if you have any, I guess maybe plus minus would be a good way to sum up the kind of impact that he had on the game. But, how do you quantify how important CoStar is defensively?
I mean, if we're talking plus minus, he was plus 17 yesterday, which is a team high. So, scored 4 points, but South Carolina scored Virginia by 17 points when he was on the floor, which just goes to show you how good he is. I think you just look at overall, plus minus is a huge one, and I think you look at just the general flow of things. It's one of those where you have to rely on the eye test sometimes with Mike Kotsar, because, it may not look like he's making an impact, but when he's out there, the ball touches the paint a little bit more. It flows from the paint a little bit better to get good shots. And he's this team's best player right now, and just overall well-rounded. A.J. Lawson's your best offensive player, but Mike Kotsar can give you 15, and then he can also prevent the other team from scoring. And South Carolina doesn't have a lot of those guys right now playing up to that level that Kotsar's at right now.
Talking to Collyn Taylor of Gamecock Central, one of the things that we talked about would have to happen for South Carolina to pull off this upset would just have to have an uncharacteristically good shooting night. They did shoot very well from the floor, 27 of 49. That's just over 55%, but still just 6 of 17 from 3. And it felt like, if I remember correctly, were 5 of those 6 maybe in the first half. It wasn't an outrageous shooting night, but it was still enough to get it done, which makes me just think back to the beginning of the season when we were thinking about what the ceiling of this team is, if they actually do have a 13 of 19 from 3 kind of shooting night, which they haven't really had this year.
Yeah, and I think that you look at that performance, you're like, wow, they shot 55%. That's, otherworldly. And really, it's not. They got good shots, and there were only a few here or there that I looked at and said, oh, no, and then it goes in. So this was not like Wes Myers territory at Florida a few years ago where he's throwing everything up and it's going in. They got good shots from the offense, and I still think you're starting to see guys like Bolden and Kusnard and Minaya hit a huge 3 lane. I think that might have been their only one of the second half, or at least the biggest one in the second half. You're starting to see the guys that were in funks to start the year start to kind of get out of them, and shots are falling because of it. And they're getting good offense. They've gotten good offense all year, but shots are starting to fall now, and you're seeing the byproduct of that.
Virginia won the offensive rebounding margin, the total rebounding margin, the assist margin, the blocks margin. They did have more turnovers, and obviously South Carolina had a bunch of steals, as I mentioned. But an 11-point win, and again, Virginia got it close. They tied it up at 45 with about 11 minutes to go in the half. By the end of the game, Carolina was in control, and it still didn't feel like it was their best game of the season, but it still didn't feel like the best game that they could have played. A.J. Lawson only had 14 points and had 4 turnovers compared to only 1 assist. Are you starting to believe again in the ceiling of this team?
Yeah, and I think you're starting to see Frank Martin's message at the beginning of the year kind of come true, where it's like, we got to figure some pieces out, and once we do, then we'll have a pretty good team. But they have to figure some stuff out, and they went through their lull, kind of middle of non-conference play when they hit some adversity, and kept kind of worked through that and made the necessary changes, and give Frank Martin credit for not being overly stubborn and fixing some things that needed to get fixed. And you playing Trey Hannibal a little bit more. You're playing Jair Bolden off the ball a little bit more. And it's working out. And I think you're starting to see the personality of this team with Keyshawn Bryant coming back and Jair Bolden feeling a little more comfortable start to kind of come to fruition a little bit.
I don't think it's you said in your piece on Gamecock Central this morning that you think this might be the biggest regular season win for Frank Martin since he's been at South Carolina. But if we do want to play devil's advocate a little bit, you can say this is not a good or even really average offensive team in Virginia. The most points they've scored this entire season is 65. It always felt like a race to 60. It's incredible that Carolina was able to get to 70, given that Virginia was only allowing 44 points a game. But how much do you think Carolina fans should pump the brakes in terms of optimism, just knowing that maybe by the end of the season we will find out that this isn't a top 10 caliber Virginia team?
I think you obviously want to take every good win with a grain of salt because, things can happen and it can be a fluke, but Virginia is a defending national champion. Now, granted, this team is not as good as last year's team was, obviously, but they're a good team. They will finish in the top 25 more than likely this year. And anytime you can go on the road against a defending national champ and who is in the top 10 when you play them and win by double digits, I mean, that's you hang your hat on that and you enjoy that for as long as you can until you got to get back to work because this is probably Frank Martin's best regular season win. Definitely his best regular season road win since he took over at South Carolina.
You and I talked, I don't remember if it was last podcast or podcast before, just about how important that Florida buzzer beater was for Carolina last year, where, you feel like every single bit of the momentum that they had in that SEC season started with the Florida win. It's like if you lose that, maybe they're just like 9-9 or something. So it's sometimes it's hard to exactly understand how momentum works in sports, but this feels like the kind of game. Now Carolina has a good chance of taking a 3-game winning streak into SEC play. The whole season could have just pivoted on this Virginia game, which seems like an overstatement, but I don't think it is.
No, and I think that anytime you win a game, it's easier to move on to the next one. And this seems like one of those where South Carolina figured it out. And it's not like they jumped out to a 20-point lead and, coasted the entire game. They fought some adversity in that second half. Virginia tied it up, and you're on the road against a top 10 team with that crowd into it. It could have been easy to fold, and they didn't. And they kind of answered the bell, something Frank Martin's wanted them to do all year. They answered the bell and went on this, I think, 25-14 run to end the game. And it's insane. It's kind of a testament to how far this team's come in, a month.
Yeah, in such a short period of time. And with such young players still playing a huge role on this team. Obviously, Mike Kotsar with a lot of experience, but everybody else in there is relatively young. Jair Bolden playing his first games for Carolina. Keyshawn Bryant, his second year. A.J. Lawson, his second year. Mania coming back off of injury. Trey Hannibal, a big 7 minutes off of the bench. It's his first year. Frank, it's his second year. It's amazing to see a team that young and relatively inexperienced play with such grit. Because I'm with you. As soon as it was tied at 45, I was like, this is when the national championship pedigree takes over. This is when Carolina capitulates, not because they're bad, but just because you're on the road. And it's the defending national champions, and they are the team that is expected to win the battle of mental fortitude, but it was Carolina that looked cool in the clutch.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to, these guys are young, and it's hard to forget that. It's easy to forget that sometimes because they have played so much, but, this is probably one of the more intimidating atmospheres they've played in, especially in the non-con, since they got here 2 years ago. And they've played a lot, and they're experienced, and they're young, but they kind of have that fortitude that some of these guys in Virginia don't have. Their point guard's a sophomore. They are starting another sophomore and then a freshman. So this was kind of their first test, the freshmen, and they a freshman on Virginia, that is, and they kind of failed it. And South Carolina rose to the challenge, and Mike Kotsar was a big reason why, and they didn't blink. And that's something that excites you if you're a South Carolina fan heading into this pretty pivotal SEC stretch with Florida, Tennessee, and Auburn kind of due up.
He is at Collyn Taylor on Twitter. Read him on GamecockCentral.com. Listen to his still untitled, title in progress podcast with me on the Gamecock Central Podcast Network. We are not going to be able to get together before Christmas, so this is sort of taking the place of that. We will be back in the latter half of the week to talk a little bit more in depth about the Virginia game because there's some other advanced metrics that you have that I want to dig into. And, of course, preview South Carolina's last game of the non-conference against Stetson, which, oh, my gosh, no better way to kill the momentum of beating a top 10 team on the road than to, lay an egg against Stetson. So, don't do that. But, Collyn, thank you so much. And before you get out of here, we are looking back, the rest of the show today, we're looking back at the entire decade and trying to figure out who the player of the decade is across all of South Carolina athletics. I know you're a basketball guy. Mm-hmm. I have Sindarius Thornwell in there. Would you pick Sindarius Thornwell or Asia Wilson over Connor Shaw or Matt Price or Michael Roth?
I'm also a baseball guy, so Mike Roth is hard to turn down. If I was going to pick a basketball player, it'd be Asia Wilson, just because she was so dominant. She's probably the best I'm just going to go Asia Wilson. She was dominant for 4 years at South Carolina, and is the face of the WNBA now. And maybe more recency bias to Mike Roth, who played obviously the early 2010s. But I'll probably go Asia Wilson on that one.
So on my poll question, I put Matt Price because I just had to pick a baseball player, and between Christian Walker and Michael Roth and Matt Price and Jackie Bradley Jr., I didn't know who to pick. I went with the closer, and everyone's acting like I'm an asshat for picking Matt Price over Michael Roth. Is that a justifiable pick, or do you think I'm an idiot?
I mean, I wouldn't call you an idiot, but, Mike Roth was the best pitcher in college baseball for, I think, what's the better part of 2 seasons. Maybe the best college pitcher of all time. It's hard to keep him off that list.
Okay. All right. That's the nicest way you could have said that. Collyn, thank you so much. Have a Merry Christmas. I'll talk to you later this week.
Merry Christmas, guys. Enjoyed it.